He said love protected us, but nobody can completely protect a daughter when an uncontrolled and utterly selfish person like my mother lives under the same roof and wears the same wedding ring as you. My name is Julia May Fitzgerald. I'm 79 years old, and I've lived every one of those years right here in this blessed corner of God's earth called Blue Mountain in northern Alabama. Most folks call me Miss Julia or Granny Jules, and that's just how I prefer it. Today, I'm sitting here in this rocking chair my late husband John gave me as a wedding present all those years ago, ready to share a story I never thought I'd have the courage to tell. Before I begin, I want to thank each and every one of you watching. Let me know in the comments what part of America you're listening from. It brings me such joy knowing this old woman can come into your home through this internet thing my grandson Peter taught me to use. If you enjoy my story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Every subscriber is like a warm hug reaching me here and giving me strength to keep sharing my story. I was born in 1944 in a simple wooden house with a tin roof right here in rural Alabama in a time when electricity wasn't even reliable. It was just me, my daddy James, and my mother Margaret. An only child, which was rare back then when families usually had 6 or 7 kids. Today I understand it was God who prevented more children from coming to suffer what I suffered. My daddy was a cotton farmer working from sunup to sundown in the fields. A good man with calloused hands and an easy smile, even when times were tough. He taught me about farming, set me on a horse when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, showed me how to tell when the cotton was ready by the feel of the bolls. Julia May, he'd say, learn these things, because knowledge is the only thing nobody can take from you. Now, my mother. Well, my mother was what folks called high-strung, but today, with what I know now, I understand she suffered from serious mental problems. One day she'd be happy, humming around the house, making delicious meals and brushing my hair with care. The next, she'd turn into someone completely different, like an evil spirit had taken hold of her. She'd smash dishes, scream nonsense, look at me like I was a stranger who'd invaded her home. And the drinking only made everything worse. It started with a little nip of whiskey hidden by the wood stove while she made lunch, then another sip while doing laundry. By evening, the bottle would be half empty, and she wasn't my mother anymore. She was someone else. "Worthless child, you're nothing but trouble," she'd say, while I tried to hide under the kitchen table. "If it weren't for you, I could have run off with Billy." This Billy was a traveling salesman who passed through now and then. I only understood much later that my mother was having an affair with him. The beatings started for any reason. If I dropped a glass, if I took too long fetching water from the well, if I cried in fear when she started yelling. "I'll teach you to be somebody," she'd say, grabbing Daddy's belt or a green switch from the willow tree that burned like fire on skin. Daddy rarely saw these scenes. She was clever, waiting until he left for work. When he came home and found me with marks, my mother would quickly make up stories. "This stubborn girl fell out of the peach tree," or "she was playing in the blackberry bushes. I done told her not to." And I, scared to death, would nod my head in agreement. There were days she'd disappear. Leave early morning, saying she was going to the general store, and only come back 2-3 days later, smelling of whiskey and cheap perfume. Daddy would go crazy with worry, searching every corner of the county. I'd stay with our neighbor, Miss Beulah, an old lady who made buttermilk biscuits that melted in your mouth and told me stories to distract from the fear. When Mother came back, Daddy would try to talk. "Maggie, you need help. Let's go to town and see the doctor." She'd turn into a wildcat. "You calling me crazy? I'm crazy, James?" And she'd start breaking everything, tearing clothes, threatening to burn the house down. Once, when I was about 8, I put on a Sunday dress Daddy had bought in town. It was light blue with little white flowers, the prettiest thing I'd ever seen. My mother looked at me with hatred that froze my blood. "Think you're pretty? Think you're gonna take your mother's place? Already sweet on your own daddy?" And in a rage, she grabbed scissors and cut the dress right off my body, leaving me standing there in my underwear in the middle of the parlor, crying from shame and fear. Money was another problem. Daddy kept it in an old coffee tin, hidden under a loose floorboard, what he could save from selling cotton. It was for buying seed, fertilizer, medicine when needed. Every so often, he'd open the hiding place and the money would be gone. At first, he thought he'd counted wrong. Then he started marking down how much was there on a piece of paper. No doubt about it. She was stealing. "Margaret, where's the crop money?" he'd ask. "What money? You going crazy? Probably spent it on moonshine at the tavern and now you're blaming me," she'd shoot back, turning the situation around. One night, I woke up to find Daddy crying quietly at the kitchen table. I'd never seen my daddy cry. Strong man who could take sun and rain in the fields without complaining. But there he was, sobbing like a child. I tiptoed over. "What's wrong, Daddy?" "Nothing, sugar. Go back to bed. Is it because of Mama?" He looked at me surprised. I don't think he expected a 9-year-old to understand what was happening. He pulled me onto his lap, something he hadn't done in a while, thinking I was too big. "Your mama's not a bad person, Julia May. She's sick, but she doesn't know she's sick, you understand? It's like she has a fever inside, but in her head. Why doesn't she take medicine then? Because to take medicine, first she'd have to accept she's sick, and she won't accept it." That night, he told me he'd met my mother at a church social. She was the prettiest girl at the dance, long black hair, honey-colored eyes, a smile that lit up everything around. "Just like yours, sugar." He fell in love right away. The first years of marriage, they were happy. She was loving, lively, full of plans. Then she started to change. First came crying spells for no reason. Then fits of rage over little things. Finally, the drinking came as her way of trying to medicate herself. "Her daddy, your granddaddy, was like that too," he explained. "Drank, got violent, then cried with regret. Her mother put up with it until she died young. From heartbreak, they said. Daddy tried everything. Brought faith healers to our house when she refused to see the doctor. Holy women, herbal teas, prayers at revivals. Nothing worked. Over time, she got worse. And slowly, she was destroying not just herself, but everything around her. My daddy's love, the peace in our home, my childhood. The neighbors avoided our house. Other children weren't allowed to play with me because their parents wouldn't let them. At school, when I started attending, I heard whispers. That's the crazy woman's daughter. I hid in corners, trying to be invisible. I learned not to draw attention, not to make noise, to predict her moods by how the door slammed when she came in. Daddy tried to make up for it. On weekends when he wasn't in the fields, he'd take me fishing at the river. He taught me to make bird traps, just to look and let them go after. He told made-up stories about brave princesses who saved whole kingdoms. He showed me the constellations in the night sky, giving them funny names he invented himself. That there's the pressure cooker, and that's the cowboy's hat. They were moments of peace in a world that, for me, always seemed on the verge of exploding. I lived walking on eggshells, trying to guess which version of my mother would appear each day. If it was the one who made sweet cornbread and called me my little darling, or the one who threw plates at the wall and pinched me until I had purple marks on my arms. Everything got worse when I turned 12 and my body started changing. Breast buds appearing, hips widening. My mother looked at me like I was a rival. Think you're a woman now? Think men are going to want an ugly thing like you? The same day she'd compliment, what a pretty girl Mama has, and hours later accuse, you swinging your hips to catch your daddy's attention? One afternoon, I came home from school and found our dog, Blue, dead in the backyard. He'd been poisoned. Daddy wasn't home, had gone to sell cotton in town. I ran inside crying, calling for my mother. She was in the kitchen, drinking coffee with a man I recognized as that Billy. Mama, Blue's dead. She didn't even look at me properly. So what? Just a mangy mutt. But do you know what happened? That's when I saw an empty bottle of rat poison in the corner of the sink. The man noticed my look and laughed. Your mama don't like animals, girl. Don't like animals or children, ain't that right, Maggie? She laughed too, a laugh that didn't sound like her. Only like men, Billy. I ran out of there, scared of what might happen. Went to Miss Beulah's house and stayed until nightfall when Daddy came back. I didn't have the courage to tell what I'd seen. I was afraid if Daddy confronted Mother about Billy, she might do something worse. Not to the dog this time, but to me. The fear grew with me. It grew like kudzu, taking over everything. Fear of coming home and not knowing what I'd find. Fear of sleeping and waking up with her standing by my bed, watching me in the dark like had happened a few times. Fear that one day she'd do to Daddy what she did to Blue. It was too heavy a secret for a girl to carry, but I carried it, day after day, pretending in front of others that we were a normal family. I painted pictures at school with father, mother, and daughter holding hands under a smiling sun. I lied when the teacher asked about the marks on my arms. I smiled when they asked if everything was okay at home. And that's how my childhood went, folks. A mix of terror and small joys in the gaps my daddy managed to create. Learning to read was my salvation. In books I could escape, be someone else, live other lives where mothers loved their daughters, and there were no monsters hiding inside people who should protect you. Now, looking back with the eyes of someone who's lived a lot, I understand my mother was sick. Back then they didn't talk about bipolar disorder, about alcoholism as a disease. It was all weakness of spirit, lack of God in the heart, or simply madness. There was no proper treatment, no right medicine, no support for families, but understanding doesn't erase the scars. There are marks that time softens but doesn't make disappear, and it was carrying these scars that I reached my 14 years, when finally things began to change in a way I never imagined. My daddy, James, was one of those men God sends to earth to show there's still goodness in the world. While at home I lived walking on eggshells, in his company I could finally breathe without fear. It was like we had two completely different worlds under the same roof. At 14, I was already about the size I am today. Always was a tiny thing, but inside I carried a grown person's weight. I learned early to read the signs, to notice when the storm was forming on the horizon. I could tell by how the door slammed, by the smell of whiskey mixed with coffee coming from the kitchen, by how the birds suddenly went quiet in the yard. Seemed like even they recognized when my mother was having her bad days. Daddy noticed my suffering. Of course he did. I saw him many times wiping tears away behind the barn, or praying quietly in the early morning when he thought I was sleeping. St. James, my patron saint, protect my daughter, he'd murmur. And somehow, his prayers were answered, because in the most critical moments, some salvation always appeared. I remember one day when my mother had disappeared again, this time for almost a week. Daddy decided we needed to have a good day, despite the worry. He woke me up early, still dark. "Pack a bag with a change of clothes and your Sunday dress," he said with a smile I hadn't seen on his face in a long time. "We're taking a trip." I packed everything in an instant, my heart jumping with joy. A trip? We'd never left that piece of land. We climbed into the wagon pulled by our mare Star and headed toward the main road. The sun was starting to rise, painting the sky a pinkish orange so beautiful it looked like a painting. The smell of dew-wet grass, the birds waking up and singing, everything seemed new and full of promise. "Where we going, Daddy?" "Birmingham. I'm gonna show you the city, Julia May." I grabbed his hand and squeezed tight. The city. I only knew it from stories he told me, from pictures in school books. We traveled all day, even caught a ride on a truck on the big road. When we got to Birmingham, it was almost night. We stayed at a distant cousin's house who barely knew who we were, but welcomed us with an open heart, as is the way of our people. The next day, Daddy took me downtown to see the tall buildings. When I saw all those people, all that movement, I couldn't hold back tears. It was too big, too beautiful, too free. Daddy taught me how to ride in an elevator without being scared, to feel the city sounds like they were music. "The city is like life, Sugar," he explained. Sometimes calm, sometimes wild, always moving. But no matter how strong the storm on the surface, in the depths, the water stays peaceful. That's when he gave me a present I keep to this day. A little seashell, pink, perfect. He'd bought it at a novelty shop. When things get hard, hold this shell and remember there's a huge world out there waiting for you. We went home 2 days later, and as expected, my mother had already returned. She was in a fury at not finding us. She'd broken dishes, torn the curtains my grandmother had made, scattered flour all over the kitchen. When she saw us coming, she came at Daddy with a broom. "Where were you? What woman were you with, James? Taking my daughter to meet your floozies? Daddy, always patient, didn't respond to the accusations. He just said, with a firmness he rarely showed, "Enough, Margaret. I won't allow you to turn this house into hell anymore. If you want to stay here, you'll have to get treatment." It was the first time I saw him stand up to her like that. Something had changed in him during our trip. Maybe seeing the city, that force of life, had given him new courage. Or maybe it was just a father's love reaching the limit of what it could bear. The months that followed were a silent war inside the house. Daddy hid the whiskey bottles. Mother found a way to get more. He tried to convince her to see the doctor in town. She refused tooth and nail. "I'm not crazy. You just want to lock me up so you can have the house, the land." Meanwhile, Daddy bent over backwards to give me moments of normalcy. He built a small wooden bookshelf that he filled with secondhand books he bought when he went to sell cotton in town. Through those yellowed pages, I discovered worlds I never imagined existed. I traveled with characters to distant lands, cried with their sorrows, celebrated their victories. Daddy noticed the books were my refuge and encouraged more and more. "Study, Julia May. Knowledge is the only thing nobody can take from you." And I studied with a hunger that came from my soul. While other girls my age were already dating, thinking about marriage, I dreamed of other horizons. I wanted to be a teacher, wanted to help other children find in books the same comfort I found. On nights when my mother went out, by then she didn't even pretend anymore that she was meeting other men, Daddy and I would sit on the porch and he'd teach me to recognize the constellations. He made up stories for each group of stars, stories that weren't in any book, straight from his imagination. "See those 3 stars lined up? That's the belt of the brave hunter. He protects the forest and all the creatures that live in it." It was in those moments I felt like we had our own secret language, a private world where pain didn't enter. Daddy never spoke ill of my mother. Even suffering, even betrayed, even seeing his hard-earned money stolen to buy whiskey, he never put her down in front of me. "Your mother is sick, Julia. She didn't choose to be this way. The whiskey is a demon that takes hold and won't let go." He's the one who taught me the biggest lesson of my life, that it's possible to love without stopping to protect yourself, that it's possible to forgive without accepting abuse, that it's possible to have compassion without becoming a victim. When I turned 15, Daddy threw a small party, just the 2 of us really. He roasted a chicken on the wood stove, made grits, salad from the garden. For dessert, a cornbread cake with jam that he made himself, clumsy but with so much love, it was the best in the world. As a present, he gave me a hardcover notebook, one of those pretty ones you only saw at the stationery store in town, for you to write your thoughts, your dreams, your stories. One day you'll want to remember everything you lived, and our memory is weak. Only many years later did I understand the value of that gift. It wasn't just a notebook. It was an invitation for me to tell my own story, to have a voice, to transform pain into words and words into healing. That notebook became my confidant in the following years. In it, I wrote everything. The good days, the bad days, hopes for the future, fears I didn't dare share with anyone. I hid it under the mattress, and when I heard my mother approaching, I'd quickly hide it. One night, though, she found it. She was drunk, going through my room looking for money to buy more whiskey. When I saw the notebook in her hands, my blood ran cold. "What's this? Been writing about me, you ungrateful child?" I tried to get the notebook back, but she was stronger. She started reading out loud, mocking passages where I vented about the fear I felt of her, about how I dreamed of a different mother, about how I felt alone even living with 2 people. With each word she read, her face got redder, more twisted with rage. She threw the notebook on the floor and came at me. "So that's what you think? That I'm a monster? That I don't love you? After everything I've done for you?" I ran to my parents' bedroom, locked myself inside. She was pounding on the door, screaming terrible things. Daddy wasn't home, had gone to help a neighbor whose cow was calving. I prayed he'd come back soon, that someone would save me. When Daddy finally got home, he found the house turned upside down and me huddled in the corner of the room, shaking like a leaf. My mother had torn my notebook to pieces, broken my few belongings, and finally passed out drunk in the living room. Daddy didn't say anything. He just hugged me tight, so tight I could feel his heart beating against mine. That night, we both slept on the porch, looking at the stars, afraid of what might happen if we stayed inside. In the morning, when the sun rose, he made strong coffee and called me for a serious talk. "Julia May, we can't live like this anymore. It's time we did something." It was the beginning of the change we'd been waiting for so long. Daddy, that quiet man who endured everything with resignation, had finally reached his limit. Not for himself, for me. His love for me was bigger than fear, bigger than doubts, bigger than the pity he felt for the sick woman he'd married. And so, with that father's love as a compass, we began to plan what would be the end of our suffering and, ironically, my mother's salvation. Because sometimes you have to hit rock bottom to finally look up and see the light. That morning in 1959, sitting at the kitchen table with Daddy, I felt something important was about to happen. I'd just turned 15 and had dark circles from weeks of not sleeping right. My destroyed notebook, my few teenage dreams scattered in pieces on the floor of the house. "My girl," Daddy began, holding my hands between his, rough from so much work in the fields. "Today, we're getting help. Real help." I confess my heart tightened. So many times we'd tried. So many times we'd failed. Faith healers, prayers, talks, threats. Nothing had worked so far. But there was something different this time. A determination in my daddy's eyes I'd never seen before. That same morning, while my mother still slept the heavy sleep of the previous night's drinking, Daddy saddled the horse and asked me to pack a small bundle. "We'll be gone a few days, Julia May. Take what you need." I didn't ask where we were going. I trusted him more than anyone in the world. If he said it was time to get help, then it was. I packed some clothes, soap, the hairbrush, and at the last moment, gathered some pieces of my torn notebook I'd managed to save. They were loose pages, crumpled, but contained parts of my story I didn't want to lose. We left early, with fog still covering the cotton fields like a blanket. The feeling of leaving that house behind, even temporarily, was a mix of relief and guilt. Relief to escape the constant fear, guilt for abandoning my own mother. "What about Mama? She'll be alone?" I asked as we moved away down the dirt road. "I left word with Miss Beulah. She'll check on your mother later." We traveled all day, first on horseback to the main road, then caught a ride on a milk truck to Montgomery. From there, a bus to Birmingham. It was the second time I'd been to the city, but this time it wasn't for sightseeing. Daddy's face was tense, focused, like someone going into an important battle. We arrived late afternoon at a big building with walls yellowed by time and tall windows. At the entrance, a sign read, "Jefferson County Courthouse." I'd never been in such a place, so imposing, so serious. Daddy adjusted his straw hat, smoothed his shirt to get the travel wrinkles out, and looked at me firmly. "We're going to find justice, my girl. Justice that helps all of us, you, me, and your mother too." Inside the building, long hallways and many doors. People in suits and ties walked quickly with papers in their hands. I felt small, out of place in my simple dress and worn sandals. But Daddy walked like he knew exactly where to go. He stopped at a door that read, "Juvenile Court." Only then did I understand. He wasn't there just because of my mother, but because of me too. To protect me. A middle-aged man wearing round glasses with gray hair at his temples received us. Judge Thompson, juvenile court judge. He had kind eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. "Mr. Fitzgerald, you came. Good. And this must be Julia." I was surprised he knew our names. Later I found out Daddy had come to the city alone weeks before to consult about what could be done. He'd talked to lawyers, social workers, explained our situation. The plan had been in motion for some time without my knowing. In that room, for the first time in my life, I told a stranger everything that happened in our house. The beatings, the screaming, the threats, the nights I woke up with my mother watching me in the dark, the poisoned dog, the stolen money, the men she brought home when Daddy traveled. I talked about the constant fear, about how I'd learned to read danger signs, about how many times I thought I wouldn't survive until the next day. While I spoke, tears ran down my daddy's face. They weren't tears of weakness, but of a strong man finally admitting he needed help, that he couldn't protect his daughter alone anymore. Judge Thompson listened to everything carefully, taking notes, occasionally asking for details. When I finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. "Julia, you're a very brave girl. What you and your father are going through isn't right, isn't normal, and isn't your fault. Those simple words fell like balm on my wounded soul. It wasn't our fault. It wasn't because I was a bad daughter. It wasn't because Daddy was weak. It was because my mother was sick, and that sickness needed to be treated. We left the courthouse with a plan. The next day, a social worker, a doctor, and 2 policemen would go with us to our house. They'd assess the situation, and if necessary, my mother would be taken to a psychiatric hospital in Birmingham, where she'd receive proper treatment. It wasn't prison, it was care. It wasn't punishment. It was a chance for healing. We spent the night at the home of a social worker, Mrs. Evans, who opened her doors to us with a kindness that moved me. She had a small but clean room with a window overlooking a garden full of pink azaleas. I slept like I hadn't slept in years, without fear, without startle, without needing to keep my ears alert to every noise. The next morning, on the way home, Daddy tried to hide his nervousness, but his hands trembled slightly on the reins of the horse we'd borrowed. What if she's not there, Daddy? What if she's run off again? Then we wait for her to come back. We won't give up, Julia May. Not this time. When we arrived, we found our house in even worse shape than we'd left it. More things broken. Food from the pantry scattered on the floor, cheap wine stains on the walls. And my mother, sitting in the middle of that destruction, looked like a lost child, playing with the pieces of what was once a family. She raised her eyes when we entered, her gaze empty, without recognition. She was thin, her once beautiful hair now tangled and dirty. For a moment, I felt deep pity. This wasn't the woman my daddy had met at the church social, the prettiest girl at the dance. She was just a shell of what she'd once been. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse from so much screaming, from so much drinking. "What do you want in my house?" My heart tightened. She didn't even recognize us. How far had the disease taken her mind? There was no time for answers. Soon the social services car arrived, bringing the doctor, social worker, and police officers, as arranged. My mother, seeing strangers approaching, panicked. She started screaming, throwing whatever she could find. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my house. You want to lock me up? Kill me. James, you traitor, you called them to take me." It was a painful scene. The doctor tried to talk to her, show they were there to help, but she was beyond any reasoning. When she lunged at the social worker with a knife, the police had to restrain her. They took her away, still screaming, still fighting. At the last moment, before getting in the car, she looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Pure fear, like a cornered animal. "Julia, my daughter, don't let them take me." It was the first time in years I'd heard her call me daughter, without accusing me of something, without humiliating me. I almost broke down, almost ran to stop them from taking her. But Daddy held my hand firmly. "It's for her own good, Julia May. For all our good." We were left alone in the destroyed house, father and daughter, watching the car disappear down the red dirt road. There was no joy, no sense of victory, just a strange emptiness and the certainty that nothing would be like before. In the following weeks, we began to rebuild our life and our house. We cleaned up the pieces, fixed what was possible, threw away what was beyond repair. We planted flowers in the garden bed that had dried from lack of care. We tidied every room, swept every corner, as if we could also sweep away the bad memories. We started getting news from the hospital. My mother had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and severe alcoholism. She'd need prolonged treatment, maybe for years. The news was hard, but at least now we knew what we were fighting against. It wasn't meanness, it wasn't lack of love. It was a real disease with a name and treatment. A month after admission, we were allowed to visit her. I made the trip to Birmingham with my heart pounding, not knowing what to expect. We found my mother in a large room, sitting looking out the window. She was cleaner, less agitated, but still very thin. There were no big emotions at this reunion. She seemed sedated, distant. She recognized Daddy, but looked at me as if I were just a vague acquaintance. Maybe the medications, maybe the disease progressing, maybe selective memory erasing what was too painful to remember. "Are you better, Margaret?" Daddy asked, sitting beside her. "I'm tired. I want to go home." "You can't yet, honey. You need to get well first. And how long will it take? As long as necessary. She nodded, like a child accepting a rule she doesn't quite understand. Then, in an unexpected gesture, she took my hand. She didn't say anything, didn't look me in the eyes, just held my hand. It was the most sincere gesture of affection I'd received from her in years. We went home that day with a lighter weight on our shoulders. There was hope, small, fragile, but real. In the following months, a routine was established. We worked in the fields during the week. Now I helped more, since Daddy was getting older and his back couldn't take the same effort. On Sundays, we went to Birmingham to visit my mother. Slowly, very slowly, she improved. The doctors adjusted the medications. She participated in therapeutic activities. She was learning to deal with the disease. There were relapses, of course. Days when we found her agitated, accusatory, lost in her delusions. But there were also good days when we could almost glimpse the woman she'd once been. It was during one of these visits, almost a year after admission, that she surprised me with a question. "Julia, do you hate me?" The question came out of nowhere, while we were sitting on a bench in the hospital garden. Daddy had gone to buy water at the cafeteria. It was just the two of us. I took a deep breath before answering. The truth was too complex to fit in a simple yes or no. "I don't hate you, Mama. I hate what the disease did to you, to us, but you, no." She nodded, as if the answer made sense to her too. "The doctors say I did bad things, that I hurt you. It wasn't you, Mama. It was the disease. I remember some things, like bad dreams, nightmares. I wish I could go back, do things differently." I felt tears come to my eyes. It was the closest to an apology I'd ever heard from her, and I knew how hard it must have been for her to admit. "What matters is that now you're getting better. We're all getting better." We sat in silence after that, contemplating the garden flowers. A different silence, not loaded with tension and fear as it used to be at home, but peaceful, almost comfortable. It was that day I understood what Daddy meant by seeking justice that helps all of us. It wasn't about punishment, about revenge, about making someone pay for the suffering caused. It was about healing, about giving each one what they needed. Me, safety; him, peace; my mother, treatment. Justice came to our family not as a flaming sword cutting down the guilty, but as fresh water washing wounds, as light illuminating dark paths, as outstretched hands offering support to get up and move forward. 2 years passed before my mother could come home, not to live permanently, but for supervised visits. The house she found was no longer the same. It was prettier, more organized, more harmonious. We had a garden now, with roses and daisies. We had an abundant vegetable patch. We had peace. The visits gradually increased. First a few hours, then a whole day, then a weekend. It was a slow process of reintegration, of rebuilding trust. I was already 18 then. I was finishing my studies at the city school, dreaming of the possibility of becoming a teacher. Daddy, now with completely white hair, seemed to have recovered part of the youthfulness that hard life had stolen from him. And so, step by step, day by day, we wove a new story for our family. A story of overcoming, of forgiveness, of new beginnings. A story where justice didn't come through punishment, but through healing. Where love, even wounded, found strength to keep believing and hoping. Because sometimes life takes us down paths we'd never voluntarily choose. Dark paths, rocky, full of dangers. But it's precisely these paths that can lead us to the most beautiful landscapes if we have the courage to keep going, to seek help when necessary, to believe that better days are possible. And they were possible for us. Oh, how they were. The years following my mother's hospitalization brought a peace I didn't even know was possible to exist. Our house, once a battlefield, became a safe harbor. The nights, once filled with screams and slamming doors, were now peaceful, lulled by the sound of crickets and the croaking of frogs in the nearby swamp. 1962 arrived with the promise of new beginnings. I was 18, my face still with girlish features, but my eyes already those of a woman who knew life's difficulties too early. My mother continued at the psychiatric hospital in Birmingham, with supervised visits every 2 months. The doctor said she was responding well to treatment, but would need care for the rest of her life. A disease like hers had no cure. It had control, It had better days. It had lessons about how to live with it. It was that same year I achieved a miracle. I was accepted into the Teachers' College in Birmingham. I remember the day the letter arrived, brought by Mr. Johnson's son who worked at the town post office. Daddy opened it with trembling hands. He always asked me to read the mail since his eyes weren't what they used to be. But this time, he wanted the honor. "Julia May," he said, his eyes welling up, "you did it. You're going to be a teacher." I jumped into his arms, both of us spinning around in the yard, the chickens running scared in all directions. It was a dream that seemed impossible for a country girl, daughter of a farmer, who studied in a rural schoolhouse. But my effort, the nights studying by lamplight, the books devoured one after another, it had all been worth it. The college was a 2-hour bus ride from our farm. Every day, I woke up at 4 in the morning, helped Daddy with essential chores, and caught the first bus. I'd return when the sun had already set, tired but happy, my head buzzing with new ideas and knowledge. Daddy, now 55 with completely white hair, seemed to rejuvenate with my enthusiasm. He'd sit with me after dinner and ask me to tell him everything I'd learned. Even without understanding half of what I said about pedagogy, child psychology, or literacy methods, he listened with genuine attention, his eyes shining with pride. "Your mother's going to be so happy when she finds out," he commented one night. "She always wanted you to study, you know? Before the disease took over." It was one of the rare times he talked about how my mother was before, in the early years of marriage. A cheerful young woman, full of dreams, who loved to sing while washing clothes in the creek, who read stories to her belly when she was pregnant with me, who made plans to see me graduate, become a doctor, as she used to say. The disease stole that woman from us, but in the rare moments of lucidity during hospital visits, I could glimpse flashes of that mother who could have been. On one visit, I brought an essay that had received the highest grade. She took the paper carefully, as if it were something precious. "You write well, Julia," she said after reading in silence. "You have talent with words." It was the most sincere compliment I'd ever received from her, and I treasured it in my heart. I graduated as a teacher in 1964, at 20 years old. The ceremony was simple, in the college courtyard, with the American and Alabama flags waving in the wind. Daddy was in the front row, wearing the only suit he had, bought for his wedding so many decades ago and kept with mothballs for special occasions. His eyes couldn't hide the pride and emotion when I went up on stage to receive my diploma. I got a job at the county elementary school, the same one where I'd studied as a child. It was a wooden building with 2 rooms, where I taught the first 4 grades at the same time. The children sat on long benches, the older ones in back, the younger ones in front, all attentive to the blackboard where I wrote with colored chalk I bought with my own salary. Daddy never wanted me to contribute money at home. "Your salary is yours, sugar. Save it. Build your future." But I insisted on helping, buying things to improve our daily life. A kerosene refrigerator. We still didn't have electricity on the farm. A new radio to replace the old one that kept failing. Medicine for his back pain that increased each day. Those were sweet years, from 1964 to 1968. Years of hard work, yes, but of simple and true joy. I'd wake up early, make coffee for both of us, and head to school with my leather briefcase, a gift from the students on my first teacher's day. Daddy took care of the farm and the house, and when I came back, there was always a sweet potato pie or peach cobbler waiting, or fresh coffee just brewed. During school vacations, we'd travel to Birmingham to visit my mother, who now lived in a rest home, more open, less like a hospital. She had good days and bad days, but the medications kept the most severe episodes under control. Sometimes she recognized us immediately and smiled. Other times it took a while, as if she needed to search her memory to know who we were. On one of these visits in 1968, I noticed Daddy more tired than normal. The trip had been long, the sun strong, and he was already 61, his body marked by decades of hard work. But there was something more beyond physical tiredness, a kind of resignation in his eyes, as if he knew something I didn't yet know. On the way home, sitting side by side on the bumpy bus, he took my hand between his, calloused and now trembling. "Julia May, I need to tell you something." I felt my heart tighten. I knew that tone. It was the same one he used when he told me we needed to get help for my mother. What is it, Daddy? I went to the doctor last week. I've been too tired, with a pain here in my chest that comes and goes. I swallowed hard, feeling a knot form in my throat. And what did he say? Said my heart's not good, that I need to rest more, avoid strain. I looked at that man who was my whole world, who had been father and mother to me, who had sacrificed so much to see me happy and safe. Suddenly he seemed smaller, more fragile, as if he were withering before my eyes. Then we'll do that, Daddy. I'll take leave from school, find someone to take care of the farm. He shook his head, stubborn as always. I don't want to be a burden on you, Sugar. I don't want you giving up your dreams for my sake. You'll never be a burden. You're my family, my daddy, the person I love most in this world. He smiled, that smile that always brightened my day, no matter how hard it had been. Then let's make a deal. I'll take care of myself, follow the doctor's orders, and you continue your work. I don't want to see you sad or worried. Promise? I promised, of course, but worry had already settled in my heart and wouldn't leave. In the following months, we reorganized our life. We hired the neighbor's son, Tommy, to help with the heavier farm work. I started cooking more on weekends, leaving meals ready for the whole week. We bought expensive medicine at the town pharmacy, following the doctor's prescription. Daddy, always so active, now spent more time on the porch, watching the birds, reading the few books we had, fixing small things around the house. Gradually, he accepted his new limitations, but never lost his dignity, his kindness, the serene look that was his trademark. In January 1969, during school vacation, I surprised him. I'd saved my salary for months and bought 2 bus tickets to New Orleans. "What's this, girl?" he asked, confused, when I showed him the tickets. "We're going to see New Orleans, Daddy. You always wanted to visit the French Quarter, remember? You told me when I was little." His eyes lit up like a boy's getting a Christmas present. "But what about your mother? Our monthly visit? I already talked to the doctors. We made a special visit last week, remember? The next one will be when we get back." He nodded, too emotional to speak. We traveled by bus, a long journey, but full of anticipation. We stayed at a simple boarding house in the French Quarter, recommended by Miss Johnson, who had a cousin in New Orleans. Seeing my daddy's expression as he contemplated the wrought iron balconies, as he listened to jazz drifting from the clubs, as he watched the constant movement of people of all kinds on Bourbon Street, was one of the greatest joys of my life. For a week, he forgot the pains, the limitations, the worries. He was just a man fulfilling an old dream alongside the daughter he loved. On our last night in New Orleans, sitting by the Mississippi River watching boats pass by, he told me something I never forgot. "You know, Julia May, I spent many years blaming myself, thinking I'd failed as a husband for not being able to help your mother sooner, as a father for not protecting you better. But looking at you now, a certified teacher, a strong and kind woman, I realize maybe I didn't do everything wrong." I hugged him tight, feeling his body thinner, more fragile, but still warm and safe as it had always been for me. "You did everything right, Daddy. Absolutely everything." We returned home renewed, with stories to tell, photographs to show. We took 2, one in Jackson Square and another by the river, an expensive luxury but worth every penny. And memories we'd keep forever. But life, that relentless teacher, had more lessons in store for us. In March of that same year, Daddy woke up with severe chest pain. He was pale, sweating cold. I ran to get help, and Mr. Wilson's son drove us to the town hospital. They were 3 days of anguish, 3 days of prayers, of promises, of holding his hand in mine while the doctors did what they could with the limited resources of that small country hospital. In the early morning of the 3rd day, he passed, peaceful, serene, as he lived. His last words were for me, in an almost inaudible whisper, "Live, Julia May. Live for both of us." The funeral was simple, as he would have wanted. The coffin, covered with wildflowers picked by my students, was lowered into the red earth of the small Blue Mountain Cemetery under the sad gaze of friends, neighbors, and acquaintances he'd helped throughout his life. I returned home alone, the same house that had been the stage for so much suffering and later so much peace. The walls seemed to hold echoes of his laughter, the smell of the coffee he made, the sound of the rocking chair on the porch. I sat at the kitchen table and for the first time since his death allowed the tears to come without restraint. But in the midst of pain, A certainty formed. I wasn't really alone. I carried with me every lesson, every example, every word of wisdom he'd given me. And now it was my turn to honor that legacy, to transform everything I'd learned into something meaningful. As he said, I needed to live, not just survive, but really live, with purpose and meaning. And it was thinking about this that, a few months later, I made a decision that would forever change the course of my life, and that of many others. The house never seemed as empty as in the months after my daddy's passing. Every corner held a memory, every object had a story, every dawn brought the renewed pain of his absence. I continued teaching at the district school, but returned to a silent house where even the tick-tock of the clock seemed afraid to make noise. It was during a visit to my mother in mid-1969 that something changed inside me. She was having a good day, lucid, calm, almost like the woman she could have been without the disease. When I told her about Daddy's death, she cried. A silent, deep cry of someone who understands loss, even through the fog of medications and mental confusion. He was a good man, she said, holding my hands. Too good for me. In that moment, looking at that fragile woman who once caused me so much fear, I felt a compassion I never imagined would be possible. It wasn't pity, nor disguised resentment. It was a genuine understanding that we're all broken in some way. We all fight our battles, visible or invisible. I returned home that night with a clarity I hadn't felt since Daddy's death. All the suffering I lived through, all the wounds I carried, they could have hardened me, embittered me. But instead, they gave me a special sensitivity to others' pain, an ability to see beyond appearances, to recognize silent suffering. And that's when I had the idea that would change my life forever. The St. Mary's Orphanage was on the outskirts of town, an old mansion donated by a wealthy local family. I knew the place in passing. It always seemed sad, run down, with children with empty looks playing in a dreary courtyard. I decided to visit one Saturday afternoon, without telling anyone, just to see. What I found broke my heart. Almost 40 children, from babies to teenagers, living in precarious conditions. They lacked everything: clothes, adequate food, school supplies. But mainly, they lacked love. The 2 elderly nuns who ran the place did what they could, but they were exhausted, overwhelmed, unable to give the attention each child desperately needed. "Did you come to adopt?" Sister Elizabeth asked hopefully when I explained I was a teacher and wanted to see the place. "No, I came to offer my help. I can come on weekends, give tutoring classes, read stories, organize games." The smile on that nun's wrinkled face was like a ray of sunshine on a cloudy day. "Thank God! These children need someone who cares so much." I started going every Saturday. I brought books from school, organized tutoring classes, told stories, taught songs. The children, initially suspicious, soon began to eagerly await Miss Julia. Some grew more attached, like little William, 5 years old, who had been abandoned at the orphanage door as a baby, or Mary Ellen, 12, whose parents had died in the '67 flood. In early 1970, I made a decision many thought was crazy. I sold our property, the house, the land, the cotton field my daddy had cultivated with so much love. It was painful, but I knew he'd understand. With the money, I bought a bigger house closer to town with a large, airy backyard. And then I did something that forever changed the course of my life. I requested authorization to take 5 children from the orphanage with me. Not as official adoption. In those days, a single woman of 26 would hardly be able to adopt 1 child, let alone 5. But as legal guardian, responsible for their well-being and education. They were months of bureaucracy, of visits from social workers, of proving I had the financial and emotional conditions to care for those children. My work as a teacher, my reputation in the community, and I believe God's hand, opened doors that seemed impossible. In June 1970, we moved to the new house. Me, William, 5, Mary Ellen, 12, the twins John and Joseph, 8, and little Margaret, 3, whom I named in honor of my mother, in a silent attempt to heal the past. The first months were organized chaos. 5 children who had known only the rigidity of the orphanage suddenly had a yard to run in, a full table, a mother just for them. There were tears, fights, nightmares, bedwetting, all manifestations of deep traumas each one carried. But there were also the first carefree laughs, the first spontaneous hugs, the first, "I love you, Miss Julia," whispered at bedtime. Each small victory was celebrated as if it were conquering the world. The first A at school, the first lost baby tooth, the first time Margaret slept through the night without crying for a mother she never knew. In 1972, I received an invitation that would again change the course of our story. The director of the County Board of Education was impressed with the work I did with my children and how it positively reflected in their school performance. He offered me the opportunity to create an after-school program for vulnerable children. "You have a gift, Miss Fitzgerald," he said, "a gift that can't be restricted to just your 5 children." With the county's support, we founded the New Beginnings Center in an old house donated by the church. In the morning, children attended regular school. In the afternoon, they came to our center where they received tutoring, proper nutrition, arts activities, and mainly individualized attention. I started with 12 children. By the end of the first year, there were 30. In the second, 50. The transformation stories multiplied. Boys who were about to turn to crime and now dreamed of being teachers. Girls who barely spoke from being so shy and now led theater presentations. Children who arrived malnourished and flourished with proper nutrition and loving care. In 1975, something happened that I never imagined possible. I received a letter from the Department of Education. Our project had been recommended as a model for other counties. I was invited to go to Atlanta to receive a recognition award and present our methodology to educators from across the state. I traveled with my heart full of pride and gratitude. I, Julia, daughter of farmers, who grew up in a house with dirt floors, was now in an auditorium full of authorities, explaining how love and individualized attention can transform a child's life. When I returned to Blue Mountain, I found a surprise. The community had organized to expand the project space. Parents, former students, local merchants, everyone contributed with building materials, labor, furniture. In a few months, we had a new building with proper classrooms, industrial kitchen, library, and even a small community garden. Meanwhile, my family at home was also growing. In 1977, I took in 3 more children: Samuel, 4, whose parents had been victims of a car accident; Helen, 9, who had suffered terrible abuse in her biological family; and Benjamin, 12, who had been living on the streets since he was 7. "Aren't you afraid of getting overwhelmed?" the social worker who followed our cases once asked me. "I'm afraid of not doing enough," I answered honestly. "Every child who passes through me carries a piece of my heart. But they also leave a piece of theirs. It's a fair trade." In 1980, I received a phone call that changed the course of my life once more. My mother, who was still in the rest home in Birmingham, had very poor health. The years of heavy medication had affected her heart and kidneys. The doctors didn't give her much time. I traveled immediately and found her fragile, almost unrecognizable. But her eyes, those same honey-colored eyes my daddy had loved so much, still had a glimmer of recognition when she saw me. "Julia, my daughter," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "Does your mother have your forgiveness?" I held her cold hands in mine, those hands that once hit me, but also, I remembered now, braided my hair and made porridge when I was sick, in the rare moments of lucidity. "I forgave you a long time ago, Mama. It wasn't your fault. It was the disease." She smiled slightly, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I heard about what you do, with the children. Your father would be so proud." 3 days later, she passed. I buried her next to my daddy, in the small Blue Mountain Cemetery. There weren't many people. Few remembered her after so many years hospitalized. But she was at peace, finally free from the prison her own mind had become. Back home, I sat with my 8 children on the porch and told them about the grandmother they never knew. I didn't tell them about the abuse, about the fear. That would wait until they were older and could understand the complexity of mental illness. I told them about the pretty girl at the church social, about how she loved to sing, about how the disease had robbed her of the chance to be the mother she, deep down, maybe wanted to be. It was Mary Ellen, now a 22-year-old studying to be a teacher, who asked the question that caught me by surprise. Miss Julia, do you think it was because of what you lived through with your mother that you decided to take care of us? I was silent for a moment, contemplating the question. I'd never thought about it so directly. I think so, honey. Pain can do two things to us. It can harden us, close our hearts, or it can open us, make us more sensitive to others' pain. Thank God, and thanks to my daddy's love, I chose the second path. The following years were ones of expansion and consolidation of our work. The New Beginnings Center became a national reference in complementary education and care for vulnerable children. We received visits from educators from other states interested in replicating our methodology. In 1985, at 41, I received the title of Honorary Citizen of Blue Mountain, in recognition of the work that had transformed the lives of hundreds of children over the years. At the ceremony, I looked at the audience and saw my children. The first ones already adults, studying, working, forming their own families, breaking the cycle of abandonment and violence from which they'd been rescued. Today, at 79, I look back and see a life that was worth living. My white hair, my wrinkled hands, each line on my face tells a story of struggle, of overcoming, of multiplied love. The New Beginnings Center is now a foundation, with 12 units spread across Alabama, serving over 2,000 children. My children, 23 in total who officially passed through my guardianship over the years, are scattered around the world, each following their own path, but all carrying some of the values I learned from my daddy and tried to pass on. Mary Ellen became the foundation's director, continuing the work when my strength no longer allowed the same dedication. William, that little 5-year-old boy who was the first to call me mother, became a doctor and now coordinates a mental health project for traumatized children, a silent tribute to the grandmother he never knew, but whose story he understood and forgave. And me? I'm still here, in this rocking chair on the porch of the house that's now home to 3 of my grandchildren. Children of my children of the heart who, for different circumstances, needed help raising their own children. The wheel of life keeps turning. Yesterday's wounds transform into today's blessings. And love, that mystery that can't be explained, always finds a way to bloom even in the most barren soil. If there's one thing I've learned in these 79 years of life, it's that there are no coincidences. Every pain we experience can transform into blessing for someone if we allow it. Every scar can become a medal, every wound can become a source of healing for others. My story isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who crossed my path, to every child who found in me a bit of the mother they didn't have, to every young person who discovered their worth after a life of rejection. My dear ones watching me now, thank you for dedicating a bit of your day to listen to this old woman. If my story touched your heart in any way, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my grandson Peter's channel, who's helping me share these memories before they're lost in time. This channel is called Grandparents' Tales, and we share real stories from grandparents all over America who, like me, transformed pain into purpose, wounds into wisdom. Life isn't always easy, my children. There are days when the wind blows so strong it seems it will knock us down. But if I learned anything on this long journey, it's that we're stronger than we think, more capable than we imagine, and that love we give when it seems we have nothing to give, is the most powerful force that exists in this world. As my daddy used to say, after the strongest storm comes the most beautiful rainbow. And it's the greatest truth of this humble and colorful life of ours.